When the soldiers came home from Vietnam, they were not celebrated. They were coming home from an unpopular war. Even decades after the war's end, it still weighs heavily on the minds of those who fought in Vietnam.
So I think emotionally, psychologically, you went alone, you came home alone in an unpopular war, you saw things and did things you weren't necessarily proud of or were going to live with for the rest of your life.
There was one community that the soldiers turned to, the surfing community.
There was a lot of camaraderie out in the water.
And the surfing that helped many soldiers during combat is being celebrated 50 years later.
Uncle Sam brought me to the war, the U.S. government. I was going to school at the time in the mid-60s and had a student deferment. And at that time, we didn't have an all-volunteer army like we do today. We had a draft, and that's how I got to Vietnam, through the draft. I was drafted, I think, in May of 1966. I was drafted out of Los Angeles. My name is Ron Sizemore. I'll be 73 years old the 8th of October. Okay, look at this album, Views from Vietnam. Yeah, these are 50 years old or something. When we got over there, it was very warm. It's tropical climate. There were a lot of smells, and you get the smells of the dirt and the chickens and the getting up in the morning. Going over there as a group of people, if we were scared, we never showed it to each other. It was mixed emotions. I was drafted with a whole group of people, and we all went through basic training together. We advanced infantry, so we were all going over there with the same apprehensions. Whereas the war progressed, people that were getting drafted after me were going over as replacements to replace the people that were killed, were wounded.
The majority of every soldier that went to Vietnam went alone. Not like World War I, II, or Korea, where you trained with a unit, you went over as a unit, you came back as a unit. Hopefully all of you came back, usually not, and you bonded while you were there. In Vietnam, that didn't happen. Each day had its adrenaline moments. And every day was a bit nerve-wracking, but every day wasn't horrible either. But the day-to-day stuff, you never weren't scared, but there was little or no panic.
In this place of danger and terror, the soldiers found a rather unlikely activity to serve as an escape.
When we were first over there, we ended up at a place called Bearcat, which was between Vung Tau and Saigon. And Vung Tau was an in-country R&R center, rest and relaxation. The healing aspect of surfing was when you got in the water, you left everything inshore. Your attention's focused on the water. You didn't have gravity weighting you down. When you were in the infantry, you had a rucksack on, you were carrying ammo, you were carrying a weapon, trenching tools, your sea rations, everything. And to take all this off and all of a sudden get in the water and float on your back, it was heaven. I could look off in the distance and I could see puffs of smoke coming up, and you could hear the explosion from them, of them dropping bombs. That the war was still going on around us, but there in the immediacy of the ocean, you didn't really care about it.
Surfing was a getaway from the stresses of war, even if just for an hour or two. In some cases, surfing was even life-saving.
As a surfer, you're sitting out in the water and your eyes are constantly going back and forth looking at the horizon for waves, for anomalies, for movement. And in the infantry, when I was walking through the jungle, my eyes were always going back and forth, and several times I saw the bad guys before everybody else did.
Eventually, the war drew to a close, and the men were sent home.
Nobody talked about Vietnam unless you were talking to another vet and there was nobody else around. It wasn't a popular conversation. It was a very controversial war.
Well, we weren't called heroes when we came back from Vietnam, but today's military men and women are really heroes because they're volunteering on their own accord. We were drafted. We're heroes now. They call us heroes now, which is kind of nice. And you hear people saying thank you for your service. But when the veterans came back from Vietnam, they weren't thought too kindly of.
Many of the veterans turned to each other.
There was a lot of camaraderie out in the water, and nobody really questioned where you came from or what you did over there in Vietnam. So surfing was a healing process. You know, it made you forget about some of the things that went on over there.
Surfing was so important that the California Surf Museum in Oceanside, California, created an entire exhibit as a place for veterans to tell their stories.
How do we connect the Vietnam War with surfing?
Welcome to the Surf Museum.
So what we decided to do, it's not going to be just about surfing in Vietnam and China Beach. It's going to be about the healing art of surfing and how surfers before went to Vietnam, many of them came back physically okay, but not so mentally okay. Everybody has been touched by that.
So we started as using China Beach as our basis. We rebuilt the lifeguard headquarters in the China Beach surf shop, and then we've tried to tell individual stories. Not all combat related, not all surfing related, but having something to do with the general idea of being by the water in Vietnam.
So we didn't talk about it until recently, and this exhibit helped a lot of us start talking about it and getting over some of the guilt. So I think emotionally, psychologically, you went alone, you came home alone in an unpopular war, you saw things and did things you weren't necessarily proud of or were going to live with for the rest of your life. So that's why we've got so much PTSD and so many homeless and so many, just what I call them the walking wounded. They never came home.
The museum has teamed up with the Department of Defense to hand out lapel pins to every veteran that walks into the museum.
The pin has an eagle on the front, representing the courage and integrity of your service. The wreath, the little wreath around it, has always stood for an ancient sign of victory. The stars around his beak represent the allies that served with us over there in Vietnam. But the most important thing about this pin is what's on the back. And on the back, and you'll have to trust me, it says, "A grateful nation thanks and honors you," which is a message from our country to you for your service.
That is powerful. We didn't think would mean a thing to us, but we're all standing there, this is cool. You know, a little acknowledgement. We don't want any or need any, but all of a sudden it felt good. So we talked about it and agreed that it was kind of weird, but kind of cool at the same time.
This is the national pin. It's not made locally. Right now, 440 former POWs from Vietnam wear it. Medal of Honor recipients wear it. We have business leaders and government leaders all across the country that wear this, and 1.1 million Vietnam veterans wear this as well.
My brother told me stories that he hadn't told me before. I lost my best friend in the military over there doing the same job I had, and he lost one of his best friends from high school that I knew well, and he actually had to body bag him, and that's how he knew he died. So you have these experiences, and you push it all down, and all of a sudden, somebody says, 50 years later, says, thank you. And you go, whoa. And this comes from the Department of Defense, and the President okayed this, and that reads so well. That can be emotional to a vet who's never seen or heard anything like that. And we all carry a little bit of guilt. There's no doubt about it. No doubt about it.
It'd be an honor from one veteran to another to pin this on you. We always pin it over the heart. And we always say, on behalf of a grateful nation, thank you for your service and sacrifice. Thank you, sir. It's an honor.
That's great. That's really good.
Being a veteran is, even the war, you have more respect for the flag and the country, a deeper respect for it than what you would have not having gone through something like that. To see the American flag flying in a foreign country is like seeing a piece of home. It's more of a welcoming feeling now. The first time I put my hat on and I was crossing, I'd worn my hat down to, I had something to do down to City Hall in Laguna. I'll put my hat on, you know, and see if I can get through faster. And I was walking across the street in the crosswalk and past this lady, and she said, welcome home. And I kind of turned around and looked over my shoulder. Oh, thank you. And, you know, after 50 years or something, somebody's going, welcome home.